So just to start quickly, as you know, or I believe you were told, today we're going to discuss mostly characterization. So just to start with the basics, what is characterization in debate? Let's make it an open question, actually. Anyone wants to offer their answer of what you think characterization is?
I mean, my guess was like when you describe, like it's like framing basically, but you describe a specific thing or like how something works in order to prop up your case, right?
Yeah. So basically, in characterizations, we are trying to essentially draw a picture of how the argument looks like in real life. It is the difference between using generalities and debate-land arguments and grounding them in the real-life scenarios that people can actually imagine intuitively and relate to. There are several points for why we even do this, what it is good for, etc. So, firstly, it just makes the argument more intuitive to understand. General claims are something that requires the judge to step into the debate quite a lot in order to explain what you're meaning by them, and often even mean different things if you don't concretely characterize what they are. So there are many buzzwords terms that people don't actually bother explaining what they mean by them. As an example, let's take a classic one that I hear people often using, optimism bias. Can anyone tell me what is optimism bias? Hey, Milos.
Hello. Sorry, I'm late. Work.
Yeah, we only started with like the definition.
Maybe it's about people are thinking that all be okay. Yeah, that
Yeah.
I think
if you
you
have
mean
some
cognitive.
risks, they will somehow avoid them.
Yeah, so this is what people usually mean by optimism bias. Whereas people also often use the very contradicting one, risk aversion, which is like people are afraid of the worst outcome possible. And you always have to wonder how both can be existing at the same time, right? How can someone be assuming the best about the future while also fearing the worst about the future? And I think part of what makes these things uncompelling when you just use the buzzwords is you don't actually describe how they look like. It is much easier to sound compelling when you describe, say, optimism bias, if you actually explain what is it that people think about their future that makes them feel this way. So if I want to say that, say I want to justify banning cigarettes, and I want to say that people have an optimism bias to believe that they are able to just do it once here and once there, and believe that it won't happen to them and that they will get addicted, I want to actually describe the thought process. So when I take one cigarette, I don't feel immediately addicted after doing this. So my immediate feedback is of this being all right. When I think about my future, I am likely to want to believe this to be a good future. When I'm so used to seeing mostly terrible pictures which are so far away from what I see as my daily life, of people who have come to the worst outcomes of their lungs becoming black and their breathing becoming hard. Alexei, can I ask you to mute yourself? Then it makes it so hard for me to imagine this is something that can even happen to me, because it feels so far away from everything I'm used to, especially when most people start when they are young, and it sounds so unlike everything they know. So rather than saying optimism bias, I actually described concretely the thought process going through the mind of someone who, say, starts smoking. And obviously my characterization and concretization would be different if it were a different example of motion. But then it makes it much harder for the other side to just say the counter buzzword, but people are risk averse, because they actually need to provide an analysis and a compelling rebuttal to my actual characterization of what goes through people's minds. So I think the first thing that is valuable about characterization is it makes your arguments more intuitive and compelling and nuanced. The second thing is they are very helpful with proving extent. So this is something we discussed a lot about how people often claim to prove one thing when in effect they prove something else altogether, something which is smaller than what they claim to prove. And the big way to overcome this is with using characterization. So the classic example is, of course, backlash arguments. So, people see the Pride parade, and because of this, more hate crimes against gay people happen. And this sounds very, very extreme. And just saying backlash, antagonism, and such generic words won't ever be convincing enough to lead you to such a bottom line. However, if I want to show actually a significant difference in people's mindset, to show that even people that weren't very bigoted before could be bigoted after seeing Pride, what I want to do is be descriptive and characterize what it is that they actually see there that makes them so likely to react in an extreme manner. So the fact that they are likely to see the most extreme depictions because most people are exposed to Pride mostly when the media reviews it. And because the people that come to Pride in the first place are usually the ones who are most activist and most flamboyant and not usually the people who you see in the day-to-day. Because Pride has to be over-sexualized almost inherently because people who go there need to be able to show to the world in some way their sexual orientation, and you don't just write gay on your forehead. You need to be able to express it externally some way, so it's usually over-sexualized. Now, I still probably wouldn't go for the far-reaching impact of, it will literally cause hate crimes immediately. But when I do this, it makes it much easier to explain why someone who could be a moderate and could believe that gay people that they meet in their day-to-day, their colleagues, their friends, are just like them, will have now a bad first exposure to the LGBT community and will generalize and think that this is how gay people actually look and act like. So another thing that characterization can help us with is extent. The last thing that I will say about characterization, and we will have a full segment about this later on today, is what Artyom mentioned earlier, framing. A useful thing about characterization is being able to weaponize it to give context for your case and explain why it's the most important thing in the debate. By characterizing where the debate happens or who are the people most influenced by it, giving this context to emotion helps weigh some arguments as more important than others. So far, other questions as to what characterization is or why do we want to use it before we explain how to do that?
I just want to add something. I just want to add one thing before you go. One of the things that is kind of an understatement, and it was seen by once I judged your spar round, it was seen. It's not just that it strengthens the arguments, and you might have mentioned it at the beginning, but I missed it. The point of the matter is that sometimes without characterization, without proper characterization, there is no chance for you to win. And that's why sometimes people, when they're inexperienced, they give up much easier, this is up heavy motion, I cannot win this by any chance or something like this. But sometimes, especially if you think something is heavy on one side, maybe the characterization is the way to go to actually unlock the the case, right? Without it, you would not have the case. To illustrate this with an example, when the motion that says this house would ban public, advocacy for religion, so people proselytizing on the streets or something like this, right? Opposition, if you put it plainly, and if you just don't characterize it all, opposition is struggling. That's why in one of the debates, opening opposition in that debate was very much struggling because arguments like this creates conflict between people. Arguments like this spreads intolerance or something like this are very powerful. But if I characterize from opposition that no matter the ban, the people who would be still in the streets even if we ban this would be the most extreme people, and the least extreme people will be the ones who would give up and who would accept the law to some extent, then the whole array of arguments open, and most of the arguments from the government side is invalidated, because what they're claiming, and their whole case of the government side in this case sometimes resting on the fact that there is like uncomfortable situations, there's discrimination happening if somebody is shouting like repent, go to God, like for Muslims or for Christians or something like this. But if I, from closing opposition, characterize that in any way this happened, just the difference is that the most extreme people will still do it, who are the most likely to do these harms from the government side, and the most moderate people don't, then the debate is completely flipped on its head. And that's what happened in that debate, to be honest. I can send you afterwards the link by Artem, but that's what happened. Like it's a cool debate. It has Dan Lahab, it has Utemara and everything. But for example, that's one of my favorite examples of how characterization wins you the debate. And without it, you would definitely be swept away by government claiming some cases. But if you characterize properly, you flip the arguments of the government. You actually take them to your side because you characterize it properly. So that's the importance of it. That might be the most important instance of showing it. If you want to remember what happened in our debate, remember when we talked about sin cities and like opening towns, opening sin cities, opening sin cities in countries and not countries, in cities that are very poor, permanently poor, something like this. Characterization from the op that would claim to me this is obviously not going to be the most rundown like city that doesn't exist or something like this, but it's probably like a medium third, fourth, fifth city that is not the richest, but obviously it's not absolutely poor. That unlocks a lot of the arguments of benefits, because if you don't prove to me that, then there is only benefits from Gov side. These people will be completely starving in like literally battle for Stalingrad style without casino. They would just be dead and everything like this. And if you characterize and tell me, okay, no, realistic scenario is that this is going to be like the fourth, fifth largest city, which is obviously poor, which obviously has issues, but is obviously not on the brink of starvation, because that will be completely different thing, humanitarian catastrophe. And by characterizing like this, you remove the most powerful weapon from government side in this case. So that's the importance of characterization that is oftentimes understated. Everything else is bonus. It's cool. It's great to have. But if you cannot do it in these situations where the debate requires you to do this, that's where you're in danger at like almost automatically losing the debate if you don't notice this, which is a sad part.
Actually, to just jump in on that as well, there are some debates that just from seeing what the motion is about, you can recognize require characterization more than others. So a classic one is obviously actor motions. Every actor debate requires you to characterize who the actor is and what are their incentives. This is like the biggest clash in the debate quite inherently. Similarly, narrative debates. Every narrative debate requires you to characterize how the narrative looks like. So this house regrets the dominant narrative in society of whatever. We'll always need to describe how this narrative looks like today. But we'll look a couple of examples of this during the practice.
Sorry, just you reminded me of one more thing for narratives. Narratives without this, that's the easiest way to win every narrative debate that exists, because usually the default characterization of everybody in the room is that narrative is the most powerful thing in the world. So if the narrative says you should you should, I don't know, find the true love or something like this, every team in the room presumes that everybody buys into this narrative. Nobody else, none other narratives exist or something. So characterizing how human psychology actually looks like and what happens there is literally the key that unlocks you the arguments, makes the nuance, like almost guarantees the win if people are not ready to deal with this. So we'll talk about it a bit later when we talk about the implementation, but narrative, without this, you're lost.
I'm writing to myself now a fun example that I want us to discuss later, but we'll need to move on before that. So
yeah. I have one as well after.
Cool. So how do we actually do this? Let's go through a few big do's and don'ts of characterizations. The first one is the easiest one and almost comes directly from the purpose of what characterization is, but still needs to be said. You want to be concrete. Don't use generalities and buzzwords. I think the biggest problem I see sometimes when people try to characterize, and I see it even in many narrative debates as an example, this will look like glorification and glamorization and many more EPL terms like that. But ESLs do this as well, right? Like saying that it will have a immense value, that people will feel very connected to this. All of this is not characterizing or giving anything concrete yet. It's just using very broad strokes of what you're trying to say and leaving all of the job for the judges to step in and actually fill in what you're meaning, which A, they can't do for you. They're not allowed to according to the judge briefing, but B, you don't know how they're going to fill it in, right? They might have different intuitions than yourself and think of something completely different. Like the word glorification can have a wide spectrum of interpretations of how people think of it. I see it every time when we give a debate about glorification and teams try to interpret it completely differently based on what is convenient for them. Usually the team opposing glorification will say it means that you cannot be critical at all against something, and the team that is supporting it will say, no, it just means that you're seeing it as inspiring and something good of a value. So in order to avoid that, in order to avoid the ability to interpret what you're meaning in many different ways and make sure that you're spoon-feeding the judge with the actual argument you want to do, be concrete. Use examples. Use specifics. Don't use the generalized terms. The second do and don't is use examples that are intuitive. So it sounds like it's something trivial, but I see it all the time. When people use examples and characterizations, they are often creating a very weird niche hypothetical, or alternatively, a personal anecdote from their life that the judge can't understand. The most common one, I think, is when people use examples from their country. In Russia, we have, and as much as maybe in the Russian circuit it works, and it's true for every debater from every circuit, the judge will not have the same intuitions as you and will not find this explanation intuitive. So the thing to remember about characterization is its purpose is to lead to intuition. Its purpose is to make the judge understand what you're going at. And to do that, you want to avoid the temptation to do what is most accessible to you in your memory and actually try to think of the most common example or experience that every human can relate to. Are there questions so far about these parts? Okay. The next part will be a tad trickier, so I'll use a lot of examples to explain them.
Sorry, just literally one sentence I want to add. This thing, characterization, is no different than what you would do for your argumentation. So everything like mechanisms that you're doing is just a bit of a different focus, but the mechanisms that we've talked about previously, all of this applies to this. Like going into human psychology and all of these things, it's nothing different. Like the fact that people find it fluffy, it's not at all. So yeah, the same rules apply.
Yeah. The next thing, which also applies to arguments in general, but is especially important for characterization, you want to be comparative. So one mistake that I see people do often is characterize one side of the debate and not characterizing the counterfactual. So I'll give an example of what I mean by being comparative in characterizations. I think one good example of this would be the Athens EUDC ESL final. So the defining narrative, the defining decade being defined for the purposes of the debate as the narrative that people should use their 20s as a decade to establish the rest of their lives, find a job, settle down with a family, etc. This house regrets the narrative of the defining decade. Now, it's very tempting on both sides of this debate to characterize what is convenient for them, the problem with the other side. So probably government will want to do something like, well, the defining decade means that people are very much pressured into overworking themselves and not enjoying life. We see it in things such as the workplace being extremely demanding, the capitalist system pumping into you in the advertisements all the time how you need to succeed in life through money and achievements in order to actually be happy, and you cannot afford to just enjoy leisure, and so on and so on. And this can fall to a very simple rebuttal of, this part happens anyway. Like, defining defining decade or not, your boss will want you to overwork. Your boss is going to pressure you to do extra time in your workplace. Similarly, opposition might want to give a characterization of how a world without the defining decade will lead to people being too lazy, too short-termist, too likely to not think of their future. And then it's very tempting to use characterizations that say, well, people in their 20s are usually not understanding the things that they need to do in the future. They aren't aware yet of how hard life is going to be in the future. They haven't yet had their own expenses to pay, definitely not significant ones of having a family, and so on, which will still fall to a very simple answer of 20-year-olds are still 20-year-olds under the status quo of the defining decade narrative. They still didn't pay their own expenses. They still didn't have a constant job. They still don't know how hard it is to be an adult. The existence of the narrative doesn't fix it. It's a sort of a problem-solution mismatch in a way. And this is what happens when you characterize only one side of the counterfactual, only what is convenient for you. There are many ways to avoid that. Some people just do it by problem solution and divide it into two. I personally like working with actually a chart when I write down my arguments, when one side says the status quo and the other side says the counterfactual. The important thing is, whatever form you do it structurally, you want to make sure that every sub-part of your characterization has two sides to it. So, for example, if I want to explain both the problem and the solution in this debate, I can say, on our side, when there is a defining decade, people feel like they are supposed to feel guilty when they do something that they enjoy. It's not just pumped to them at the workplace. They don't have a safe space when they come back home. When they come back to hear from their parents how much they should invest in their future, when they open the TV and everything they see when they want to just experience leisure is movies that tell them that they should stop spending time doing nothing and working more towards their future. When they go out on dates and the first thing that their potential partner asks them is what you're going to do with yourself for a job because people expect this is to be something important, you don't have a safe space out of this. It doesn't finish when you leave the door of your workplace. It doesn't finish ever. Under the counterfactual, under a world without the defining decade, people would still have enough reasons to want to invest in their future. They are not likely to go completely binge drinking and enjoying their 20-year-olds without thinking of the future at all, like opposition might want to say, because there are still, again, incentives like boss probably pressuring you on both sides, and people generally want to earn money. But what we change is having this safe space, this ability to put work behind after 5 p.m., going back home and enjoying with your friends, going to a party at Saturday night, having this parallel. And when I do this, characterize both sides, it actually explains why I solve the problem I describe and not just describe something that is symmetric on both sides. Is that concept clear? Okay. Next, very important, you want to connect the characterization directly to the impact or bottom line of your arguments, not just characterize random things. So you're not supposed to characterize everything, okay? Be selective in what you choose to characterize. I think Milos wants to say something before that.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute for some reason. I just wanted
No
to
worries.
add one thing, which is, it is true. It is true. You need to be comparative in that sense, but just don't forget that you should also try and push things in your favor. So don't be afraid to skew it a little bit and to diminish the other side. Just be aware that the other side exists, and then you can push back on it. But sometimes it's worthwhile to try and push a bit harder picture and a bit like harsher picture. So it's not always the, how do you say, correct approach to fully give a bone to the other team and be like, if you think you can win by this, by just doing, how do you say, what you're doing, that's fine. You just need to be aware of the risk if you're doing it too much and if you're, how do you say, not looking at the other side at all. But you always, to some extent, your task as a speaker is to spin it to your side and to your end. So like you're never fully going to be realistic, which is completely fine. It's just that you need to be aware that there might be attack coming for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually important because using characterization also helps you be able to push things in your favor without sounding too extreme, right? So if I want to push, say, that the defining the decade makes people be too extreme the way that they take pressure on their work, I can use examples which are believable and intuitive to people, like the students that take Ritalin because they feel like they're in constant competition in order to get better grades, the people that pull all-nighters to make it up to their achievement goals, the people who work double shifts, so many, almost like a constant day of double shifts because they feel that they have the obligation to. I'll probably not want to use examples such as, you'll be the Wolf of Wall Street and use Coke in order to go through your workday. Characterization is also allowing us to be selective in our examples in a way that makes the argument sound more nuanced and not extreme, while still being biased in our favor. Okay. So back to the idea of we want to use characterization that is connected to our bottom line. So one thing important to remember about characterization, and I think this is something that I see commonly missed, you don't want to characterize everything. You want to be selective about what you do it and what not. And the way to identify it is very similar to what we learned about burdens of proof. Ask yourself what is likely to be in agreement and what is likely to be in disagreement. There is no need to characterize things which are not crucial to proving your bottom line. As an example, in the motion of round 8 of Thailand Worlds, this house believes that the feminist movement should adopt the narrative that all bodies are beautiful, that beauty doesn't matter, rather than the narrative that all bodies are beautiful. I remember in this room, Prime Minister spent a good 4 minutes characterizing the goals of the feminist movement and why it cares dearly about helping women feel better about themselves. And then a good chunk of the next 3 minutes characterizing how the modern beauty standard is terrible, and did a great job at it, by the way. I am so convinced by the end of their speech that the modern beauty standard is awful. I got a lot of good characterization examples of this, like how it makes women feel bad about their weight and about their bodily hair, and racial minorities feeling bad about how they look like. And then I come up in LO and take it down in just one sentence. Yeah, but both sides in this debate oppose the modern beauty standard. You oppose it in one way. You think you should advocate that beauty doesn't matter. I oppose it in another way. I think we should advocate that all bodies are beautiful, to set a new beauty standard that makes everyone feel better. And then the entire argument is off clash. So the important thing is to be selective and choose what you are characterizing and what you aren't. Make sure that you don't just characterize what is easy for you, because usually the things that are easy to characterize are the wrong things. What is easy is what is intuitive. What is intuitive is likely to be in agreement. People are not going to argue, nah, the modern beauty standard is great, feminism is bad, not likely to come up in a debate. The clash is where you want to focus your characterization efforts.
Yeah. And especially for these types of debates, that's how 99% of the feminist movement debates are won. People debate about the grand idea of how it should look like. The way that me and Janko should have won that debate is just by talking about, here is in practice how this campaign looks like. And that's characterization. Purely, how does a campaign that says all bodies are beautiful looks like versus a campaign that says beauty doesn't matter? In a sense, which one is more believable to people, or something like this. And that's where you can go into stuff like, people just don't buy that beauty doesn't matter because they feel it on their skin that it does matter. You can tell me beauty doesn't matter, but if people discriminate against me, I know it's bullshit. So in that sense, people buy it less, or something like this, right? So it's very important for every feminist debate. Let's say this house believes that feminist movement should oppose pornography, should try to ban pornography or something. How are they going to do this? What is it going to be their campaign? And lots of arguments and nuance then doesn't come from the ultimate goal of finishing or of doing the feminist of what feminist movement would like, but actually a realistic picture. Because then, from like what happened in our room in this particular round. All bodies are beautiful. Beauty doesn't matter. Opening government just talked about why it would be great if the world, if everybody in the world believed that beauty doesn't matter. That's not a debate. I'm sorry, you were defeated in 15 seconds by me talking about why nobody buys that narrative, and bye-bye. And that's how characterization wins you. That's one of the more examples of when you crack it. And once you do a prep time, every feminist debate becomes much easier, because it's just literally every feminist movement debate. What feminist movement should do is literally just a reality check of, is this realistic? How is it going to look like? Not about the end idea. And people just focus on the end idea, usually.
By the way, on this note, flagging also back to the earlier idea we discussed, I think this motion in particular very much requires a comparative characterization analysis. So Maya and I on OO did the exact same strategy Milos described of going headfirst at the clash of believability. And what we did is just completely why the everybody is beautiful is very believable, whereas beauty doesn't matter is not believable. For every metric, we compared both. So as an example, part of our own experience, rather than just, we aren't only experiencing beauty being mattering in how others treat us, but it's even deeper than that. We think beauty matters. In our own sexual attraction to others, we use it as a metric. In our aesthetic preferences of what we like to wear, which places we like to live in, we care about beauty. All of our lives, we have put value on beauty. Why is it likely to be compelling when I say everyone is beautiful? Because we also have a similar experience of having our own unique taste, of someone not sharing other people's view of what is or isn't beautiful. We are aware that different people have different perceptions of this and are already used to accepting this. So like every part of this analysis, just comparing on both sides. And I think this is usually the way to go with these motions. Okay. Okay, some guiding questions, which I think can help you in characterization. Like, all we did so far is discuss mostly in general terms what we want to do. The question now is how to get there. So what are the things you want to ask yourselves to find the good characterization for the debate? First question would be where, or the setting. A, which country, which city, and which community is this debate most relevant in? A debate takes very different form if it is in a democracy, in a third world country, in a conservative environment, or a liberal environment. So giving this context sometimes can help. I think a classic example of this, the motion this House supports gender-neutral parenting, like the people who raise children without gender. I think a government that isn't going to characterize, we support a phenomenon, meaning we support something that happens in the status quo. Where does it happen? Usually not in Texas, usually in the most liberal cities, is going to lose the debate, right? Because if you're going to need to defend raising a genderless child in a super conservative environment, you're likely to lose. But being able to give the context of it's probably in a safe environment for them is super helpful. And when we ask ourselves where it is, we ask both geographically where it is, but also just describe generally how this setting looks like. So what is visible in this setting? What are the other narratives existing in this setting, and how does this one counteract with them? Is it a setting that is comfortable or tense? What is the environment in this setting, etc.? All of these guiding questions can help us make the argument more compelling. The second guiding question is the people or the stakeholders. Who are the people that the debate is most applicable to? What is their age? It completely impacts, like if I go back to the example I gave earlier about smoking, being able to characterize most people start smoking at their teens or early 20s is something that is important in explaining how they are likely to view life. If I want to convince that they are likely to have short-termism and care about social pressure, being able to characterize them as teens and 20-year-olds makes it more compelling. But also, like, what is their social economic background? What is their mindset and pre-existing biases? What are these people likely to be believing in? These are things that help explain why some things impact certain populations and don't impact others. And this is important because in many debates, when you have competing analysis of how emotion impacts people, being able to characterize who is the population most impacted by the motion helps break down the deadlock. Because obviously for some people, some narrative is true, for other people, another will be true, and being able to show which is the likely population helps you break this down. A third guiding question that I think is helpful is thinking also of external feedback. So what else impacts those people outside of the motion at hand? Are they surrounded by people who give them advice or information? Who is the medium that reports the motion or what people are exposed to? So flagging back to the example I gave earlier about pride, being able to say more people are exposed to pride, not by being there, especially if they are conservative, but by seeing it on the news. And the media, because it wants rating, will usually only picture the most extreme cases and not the very boring cases, is something that helps describe the narrative. So part of what is the external feedback and medium and the way people talk about this is also something that helps us characterize. Time.
Yeah, especially, sorry, just yeah, I'm going back and forth. And no, especially when it gets to when it gets to deal with, like, if you remember, there is a debate in Thai Worlds which was about like giving equal time, like BBC principle, basically giving equal opportunity and equal time towards two sides and everything like this. The way to win this and the way to win, especially from op, is to just do a bit of a reality check, and that's where this point is coming from, right? So, for example, what we did in that debate is just to talk about, yeah, but currently, because everybody was talking about, like, Fox News, they're so right wing, they do so many bad things, but Fox News does have equal representation principle. They just do it badly and cleverly. How do they do this? They do this by inviting the most stupid liberal people on their programming, so that then they win every time. So technically, they are doing the equal opportunity thing, because, like, there's so many there's even more liberal views that you would see there than there's that liberal people believe in, to some extent. But to some extent, they are doing this. They are doing this and inviting. They are inviting who they want to invite. So in that sense, it kind of breaks the motion, because what people imagine the motion is going to be like, and now Fox News is going to invite the dean of, I don't know, like feminist studies professor to debate them, and it's going to be back and forth. No, dude, it's still going to be the program that existed for all these years. So that's again how characterization just breaks some implementation problems. And usually, my rule of thumb, and like just very practical tip, when you think about characterization and how things will be implemented in practice, I usually think of my own country, and I think you can do too, which is, how would this be implemented in Serbia? And then how would my politicians implement this policy that government is so beautifully proposing? Oh, look how beautiful it is. And then I can come up with so many different reasons why it's going to be done terribly. And that helped me so much in the past.
Actually, remember now another example about this, which I think is useful, because an example of emotion where I had speck knowledge, and I think this is where people often fall in characterization, because they tend to assert things that they know to be true, but don't know how to analyze why they are likely to be true to someone who doesn't know that they are. In Vienna IV 2019, I think Milos was on the 18. There was a motion about the story of Eva. So basically, what if a girl in the Holocaust had an Instagram account? And this is something that really exists in Israel, an Instagram account based on a diary of a girl who died in the Holocaust. And the motion was, this house supports this, Eva's story, like the use of this Instagram account. And I remember opening opposition in our room, ran a case about why this is likely to be a magnet for neo-Nazis and Holocaust denials, and why it is likely to have a lot of bigoted people in the comments abusing this. And I know this is bullshit, but I can just say that it's bullshit because I know. So this is exactly where characterizing how things are likely to look like using the medium helps. And then I said, hey, in Instagram, like in any social media account, you can delete comments. Given that the person who produced this wants to help reserve the memory of the Holocaust, it is extremely likely that they will delete any bad comments. B, Given most of the people who follow this are Jews who care about this, if not for any other reason than for the fact that a lot of this content is in Hebrew, it means that they have probably a likelihood of reporting the bad comments and liking the good ones. So if there are any bad comments, they will go down in the algorithm because no one will like them, which is, again, using the medium, right? How Instagram works. It's not even about who reports this, but about how it is reported, which is the medium in which it is done. So using the medium, both in terms of what it is, like there's a difference between a 200 words tweet and an Economist article, as well as who is the writer of the story, is something that can help you characterize why things are likely to look the way you know them to be or you want them to be. Next question that can help you is time. So a lot of processes that we describe are either repetitive or a one-time thing. Some of them are long, and some of them are short. Some of them are frequent, and some of them happen only on occasions. Some of them happen in the good times, some of them happen at the bad times, some of them happen when we are pressured and tired, and some of them happen when we think twice and 3 times about them. And using these pieces of context can really, really help in many things, in my experience, mostly in debates about choice and autonomy. The reason for this is mostly in debates about choice and autonomy, people want to argue for things like, the actor is irrational or uninformed, etc. And characterizing time, like how long they are irrational or how much time they have to think about something, is super crucial. Which is why in every debate about euthanasia, for example, or assisted suicide or anything of that line, if I'm PM, first thing I'm defining is, we're going to give you 6 months after you request euthanasia or assisted suicide until we implement it. So you have time to think of this. And just by making it, I already give context, which makes it so hard for opposition to say, you will decide in a rush of a moment because because you're in pain. And being able to say, because of the narrative in society that life is so precious, because people around you are going to always tell you that they want you to live longer, it is extremely likely that you will not do it in a rush. You will think twice, 3 times, endless times before you actually make the final decisions. You will consult the therapist, you will do everything else before, because it's such a hard decision, which is unlikely for people to think of it lightheadedly. And this is an ability to use time as a context to explain why I think the actor is rational. I can also use it as an opposing way, right? If I'm in opposition, I can use time to say that it's not like a one-time kind of pain that people get over. When you're experiencing day after day after day of having misery and pain, and eventually it will end. Eventually you might get cured in a year from now, perhaps. But it's so hard to think so far into the future, where every single second of your life, this is the main thing you experience. And at the moment at which you're thinking about the decision, the pain is still in the background. And you are likely to try and rationalize to yourself why it is the right choice to die, because right now it feels so easy. And tomorrow it will still feel so easy. And there will be no part of relief. This is also an ability to use time as a context to explain why irrationality is the case. So it's not only about autonomy, but I think this is where time context is often most useful. Milos, you want to add something before I move on?
No, it's fine. I agree.
Okay. Another thing that I think is helpful, which people don't use often, but I think can be extremely helpful, is using market incentives to actually play into the characterization. So the market has a huge influence on people. And this is especially important in many narrative debates where essentially the narrative has very low impact. Like the first thing I say about every feminist motion, it's very sad for me to say, but it's very true. Very few people care what the feminist movement says. Like it doesn't have a lot of power to actually influence people compared to the amount of funding you have in the industry and the private market. So being able to show how market plays into narratives in your characterization can make them extremely stronger. I actually used this in part in the round in Thai World about beauty doesn't matter versus all bodies are beautiful. One of the things I said there was the market will never play along with a narrative that says beauty doesn't matter, the beauty industry will be so opposed to this that if the feminist movement goes this way, they will use all of their funding, which the feminist movement doesn't have, in order to pump the narrative that the feminists are wrong and too extreme, and they are just wanting to take away from women things that give them confidence and feeling better about themselves, and we are going to lose in this battle because we can never combat this industry. Compare it to all bodies are beautiful, which the market has a lot of incentives to cooperate with, and actually does, right? We see it in plus-sized models. We see it in even Playboy magazine having trans models. Every part of the industry has an incentive to play into the narrative that says everyone can be beautiful if they buy our products. Fine, let's buy that bullet. We can fight that later. But at least now we don't have the industry acting against us, but playing along with us, and we get more power to actually promote our narrative. So I think using the market can often also be an important context that makes your analysis much stronger. One last thing that I will say that helps in characterization, but be careful in how you do this, is using psychological biases and psychological mechanisms. The caveat here, and we discussed this earlier, don't just say the term, all right? So there are many psychological mechanisms that I'm sure you've heard many times by now. Short-term bias, rationalization, confirmation bias, risk aversion, optimism bias, etc. Now, all of these things aren't characterizations yet. These are generic terms that TPLs like using, but thinking about them can help us actually characterize them. So an example can be, if I want to analyze, for example, why a judge is likely to have a racist bias, and I want to use confirmation bias as a way to explain this, I will not just say the words confirmation bias. I will actually explain how it happens. So most judges are likely to be white, male, old, of an elitist class that have actually got there. So far doesn't mean that they are racist, obviously. But they see white people all the time, every day. Their children, their grocery store workers, the people who drive the buses for them, the nice grandmothers at the gardens feeding the birds. They have so much exposure to white people, and occasionally they also see a white criminal at the court. As opposed to ethnic minorities, which they don't see so much in their neighborhoods because these tend to not get to the expensive neighborhoods, and they only get overwhelmingly exposed to them after those commit crimes. They see them when they reach court. They don't see the counterexamples of the good people, despite these existing in masses, but not in their neighborhoods. They are likely to then get to a point where they are having a bias that they see only representations of one kind of people, of these ethnic minorities, to make them more likely to have a confirmation bias. And now I can say it because I can actually explain this. The next time that they see someone of this ethnic minority, they are likely to compare them to other people that they've seen of this group. They are likely to think of similarities that they can draw in their heads, and the first examples coming to their minds will be criminals because they don't have other representations to think of. So this is an example of how to do this. The point is, psychological biases and mechanisms in general can very much help us think of characterizations, but the point is not to use them to substitute for characterizations. Are there questions so far before? Yeah?
And that's especially, by the way, this goes both ways, right? If other people do this thing, you can call them out and be like, yeah, your characterization is not nuanced. And that happens so many times, like the classic thing, which is these people who decide, like so many times when you hear about like judges or something, the Supreme Court, these people are old white males. And that's why they make bad decisions. That's like I roll my eyes every time. Dude, you haven't proven anything. You've done nothing. So you can call people out and be like these people, for especially when you talk about very huge professionals, like people who have been on the Supreme Court. Dude, these people have studied this for such a long time. They're aware. They have been voting in the cases before this, which also have to deal with racial issues and all of these things. It's not as simple as he's racist, so he makes decision for the other side, and that's how it goes. Similar to whatever thing like arbitration arbitration, or I don't know, like international arbitration. Ah, these white males, or movies being made, white males. Like that's a buzzword that EPL people like to use and never explain. And you can call them out on it and be like, dude, this situation is much more complex than what you're talking about. Which obviously doesn't deny that there are people who are bad or something like this, but it's not a caricature the way that you're portraying it.
Yeah. So the point is, white male doesn't necessitate equaling racist. Using the analysis to characterize why they are likely to have biases and being nuanced about this, not saying that they are complete racist, whatever. They're probably doing it subconsciously even. They're not trying to be bad, but this is how they're likely to interpret it, makes it more compelling as well. For both sides, obviously the characterization of what they've probably went through their education also helps for opposition here. Okay, the next thing that I want to discuss before we do some practice is how to weaponize characterization as a means to actually weigh your extensions or cases or explain why they are most important in the debate. So I think the valuable thing to do here is kind of work with reverse engineering. What I see often people do when they go about characterizing stuff is...
Sorry for stopping you. I need to drop. I'm going to return. I just need to answer the call. 1 sec.
Sure.
Bye.
So what I see people often doing is, when they try to characterize something, they first ask themselves how it looks like. And then after they ask themselves how it looks like, they connect it to, okay, so what this proves, what it likely explains. That's the opposite way to do this. This is a good way to do this if you want to be objective and explain what is real life, but this is not how debate works. You want your side to win. So we do it the other way around. We first ask ourselves what we want to prove, what we want to show is the most important clash in the debate, and then we explain why it is the case. So I'll give a few examples of this, which I think are good examples. One example was from 2019, when a lot of Brexit motions were set. And the motion was, this House believes that Ireland should throw a referendum to join Britain and leave the EU. And top half discussed a lot about the merits and flaws of Ireland leaving the EU. Like, obviously, OG said it will be good. OO said it will be bad. CG did something a bit more clever. CG started with the following. Having a referendum doesn't mean it will pass. Doesn't mean Ireland will indeed leave the EU. Let's start by characterizing to you why the overwhelmingly likely scenario in this debate is that Ireland stays in the EU on both sides. And the only thing that actually changes is the direct impact of having the referendum. The people who will feel like they are betrayed because they had the chance and they voted for leaving and then they didn't get to leave, the way that it will impact their relations with Britain, etc. And they characterize just why the likely scenario is going to be Ireland stays. So they did it by characterizing the interests of Ireland and why it is very dependent on the EU in many ways. They did it by describing why the Irish people in many ways feel very connected to the EU and specifically very not connected to Britain very much, more than they have to because of their history of war. So they are not likely to be very charitable of Brexit, etc. And then, of course, we are not contradicting OG. We think that there are two clashes in this debate, one in which Ireland live and one in which they don't. We think OG completely wins the question of what happens if Ireland leaves. But we show that the more important question is what happens if Ireland stays. And this is a clever way to show why your extension actually is more important than other things. And I think this is something valuable to remember because people are very good when they compare to the top half in explaining what was their extension, what they did different, but very few people are good in explaining why their extension is actually better, why they didn't just give other reasons to support the motion, but not necessarily better reasons. So often using this context is something that helps. I'll give another example, which I think is good. It was in Paris Open 2019, the final. This house regrets the decline in deference to the elites. Deference is a very EPL word, so I'm going to try to explain it for anyone who might be too ashamed to ask. It basically means being agreeable or respecting elites and their influence and their sayings. So obviously top have discussed a lot about politics, where obviously OG said the declining deference to the elites have led to more populism and populist leaders that go against the elites. And OO said a lot about why deference to the elites led to people, why the decline has led to people being more likely to hold the elites accountable and actually hold politicians accountable. Some discussions about, anti-vaxxers, medicine, other stuff, but mostly politics. CO gave an extension which on face value sounds smaller, which was about work. In work, the decline in deference to the elites makes it slightly likelier that your employer is going to be willing to accept you, even if your degree isn't from Oxford, but from a small university. And they made a full case about that. And they convinced of it very well, but it sounds rather small, doesn't it? So how do you weigh it? And I think Tex did something brilliant there, Techway, in his whip speech, of characterizing for like 2 minutes why the most impact of this debate is on the workspace, and specifically why most people are more impacted by work than they are by politics. One, this debate happens globally. Most global societies aren't democratic. So the shift in politics here or there just doesn't matter. But in most countries, because you still don't have communism, even if you have authoritarianism in most countries, you do choose where to work. So this has more of an impact in that sense. Secondly, the fact that elections happen at best in the countries which are democratic once every 4 years or so, and that's it, and that's where it's done. Your ability to be able to get the job that you want is something that impacts you every single day of your life. Thirdly, elections are usually only about the biggest of topics, because you're not going to vote on any small regulation here and there when you get to vote once every 4 years. So it's usually about the big principles. So it has very little ability to actually represent you on both sides of the debate. But in work, you actually get more than that. You can negotiate your terms and actually get something that represents much more of what you want. Fourthly, most people really just don't care that much about politics. In the US, half of the voters don't even use their right to vote. They stay home. Everyone cares about the work, and continued this way. And it was very fun to judge. And they won eventually with what sounds on face value like a small extension. So this is another example of the power of characterization to show why your extension is meaningful. I'll give a third example, which is not about extensions, but about gov versus up. Because it works in all types of weighing, not just houses, but also bench-wise. This is one that I need to give the credit to for Adam Hawksby, which is very old, like not real life old, just debate old. But he had a very good workshop on framing in particular, which I can send you the link to later, or I can send to Artem to send to you or whatever. And I think it's just a very good example of how to do this. So the motion was, this house would open separate schools for LGBT kids. And what happened basically in the hypothetical we describe, which having judged this debate a few times does happen most often, Prime Minister comes up and says, here's why LGBT kids in non-LGBT schools experience so much bullying, solitude, and not being able to have partners or even friends. And OO comes up and says, yeah, but this will be real life when they grow up, and they need to get accustomed to this and learn how to handle this, like grow a thicker skin. And in addition, the counter for this is heterosexual people need to be exposed to LGBT kids, so in the future they can become more tolerant. So we basically have a short-term versus long-term trade-off here, right? On the one hand, you have short-term bullying, but it can create better adults on both sides of the future. What do we care about more? And a very smart characterization, which Hawksby offered, was, let's characterize LGBT youth for a second. The biggest, hardest time to be LGBT is as a teenager. This is the most prone to depression time people have in general, like teens have more depression than adults. In particular, LGBT teens are very prone to depression. In fact, 42% of the trans community will attempt suicide at some point, most often in their teenage years. Secondly, adults are more equipped by nature to just deal with bullying in general. Like, yeah, we think some form of bullying will exist also in LGBT schools. It will just not be based on your sexual orientation, but you will still need to learn how to deal with people. And you will still also go out of school at some point. And thirdly, like the fact that when you're adult, people are generally just less likely to be bullying, even if they are bigots. People are not likely to be the kind to hit you on the day-to-day or call you names, because adults try to get along in society. You won't talk to your colleague in a certain way because you know it can hurt your career. So people just are more detached about this. So we think on both sides, adults will be fine. Teenagers are the most vulnerable and most susceptible to having irreversible, and this is also an important context, irreversible mental harm that will stay with them also in the long term, when they lose trust in people, when they learn that they need to hide their identity because otherwise they can get bullied for it. So by being able to characterize why the most important time is the time being a teenager, they just managed to show that the government arguments here are more important than the opposition arguments without even needing to rebut them. Of course, it's also useful to rebut them, but this is how you can also use characterization to weigh bench-wise and not only between the houses. Other questions on this part? Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. There are some basic questions to ask to make more persuasive characterization, or to find some I don't know, some pieces of characterization to be more persuasive or more concrete.
So the point is, we do it the same way that we use characterization in arguments. We do it in the same way in framing. We ask ourselves the same guiding questions, like what is the time, what is the setting, who are the stakeholders, etc. The main thing that we do when we do it in framing is to think of it in the reverse engineering kind of way. So we try to think what we are trying to prove. We're trying to identify what is the clash. So the first thing I did before I went into what is the framing even was I tried to understand what I'm trying to weigh here. So this is what happened when I described the trade-off is between short-term and long-term. Okay, next guiding question. If I know this is the trade-off, I need to prove why the short-term is more important. What can be said about the short-term? What characterizes the short-term that I can use? Short-term is their age is somewhat different, their life, the environment that they are in is different, like they are surrounded by other young people as opposed to being surrounded by old people. And then, okay, if these are the differences, let's characterize why being young is more vulnerable and being surrounded by young people is more likely to lead to bullying. And then just seeing what I'm trying to prove to be true helps me fit the characterization to what is convenient for me that the characterization would be. Does that answer the question? Cool. So what we're going to do next, this is most of what I've had to say just in the theory part of this. Let's do some practice. I have some examples that I've prepared in advance. Some of them we discussed throughout, but let's take one that we didn't yet. Okay, let's start with this house as Pope Francis would abolish the concept of hell. Your opposition, what I want you to characterize is the interests of the actor, and I'll even give you the argument. The argument we're trying to make is that the Pope believes that hell is real and that lying is a sin and he cannot sin. So what I want you to think of is characterize the Pope and his upbringing and why he is overwhelmingly likely to believe hell exists and is very important for religion. Take 2 minutes to think of this. Okay, anyone wants to offer ideas of how to characterize this? Okay, so Alma suggests things in chat. Yeah. Do you want to say that?
Okay, so we have Pop, if I'm not wrong, in charge, and we will keep status quo that now concept of hell is exist. Yeah. So first, I think that that man growed up in church, for example, took it knowledge from the church, his knowledge about humanity is based on the Bible. His parents and his teacher was very religion man, so he know every answer for the process in the world by the Bible. So and in the Bible wrote it that we have only to to exist, yeah, like a heaven or hell. So all his life he tried to go into to heaven, and he do it by the religion, and he thinks that it's right. First, why he think that it's right, because he like growed up by that knowledge, and second reason why he will do that, it's just a human view, because if he spent major part of his life for protecting that idea, that concept, most people just don't wanna be mistaken in one point, and even they will know about the truth, they will try to false that, like saying that that's not right. So he don't want to be mistaken. So he will be keeping protecting that concept from the human being. And uh, second reason for human view, it's that he has own peoples who come into the church. For them, he's like giving a lectures, something like that. So he will scare if he will make something that will in clash with the Bible, that people will leave him. So such reason.
Okay, so I think this is a good example to connect to some of the things we discussed in the lesson, because I think the characterization was good, but not connected enough to the bottom line that it's aiming to prove. So the characterization here mostly shows why the Pope cares a great deal about religion, about Catholicism, Christianity. And question, do we think it is likely that team proposition would argue, nah, the Pope doesn't care about Christianity or religion? Probably not. Yeah. So we want to be super concrete here, not in characterizing his attachment to religion broadly, but to hell specifically as a concept. Sergey?
Yes, I think that another idea with which we came here is about the risks. Yeah, if we as a pope are thinking that maybe we're thinking that hell is maybe or maybe not. Yeah, but because if if you have this motion, we have those ideas. Yeah, but there's about the risk. Yeah, if we're speaking that there is no hell and hell exists, I think this is a very big sin, yeah, because you are speaking with to a million of people that this is a lie about religion, and they will do something. I don't know, something maybe more bigger sins, yeah, because of you, yeah. But if you're staying in this idea, and there's no hell, yeah, because yeah, if you're speaking there is hell and there actually is no hell, you're like, okay, I was
Okay.
learning.
Okay, so I'll soon give Alma a chance to speak again, because I think he wrote in the chat. But just to respond to Sergey, What you describe is, I think, if I understood it correctly, very similar to what people call the Pascal's wager, which is the argument for belief in general. In this case, basically saying, well, if there is no hell and I say there is no harm, if there is hell and I say there isn't, many people will go to hell because of me. Now, this is something interesting we can discuss. However, I would say that this is an argument within the debate, which is separate from the idea of characterizing the actor and their beliefs. So I think I still want us to focus on what the Pope is likely to believe is true. Why is it likely that the Pope does think hell exists and is an important concept in Christianity? Alma?
Yeah, my name is Roland. Alma mater is just
sorry.
a nickname. Yeah, okay, it doesn't matter. So I want to say that, for example, if that person, that Pope, is very religion, so, and one of the important concept of religion is that life is just a lie. So, and after dying, you have only two two ways. So first is heaven, and second is hell. So that two concepts is very important for religion. It's one of the reasoning, one is of motivating to being in that religion, because for example, in Christianity it says if you will be, for example, Muslim, you will be go in hell, yeah, because Christianity is the most right religion or something like that. So if he will took away that part, his religion will have less meaning. So that's the reason why he will trying to keep that concept.
I think you're very close. I want to just direct you a bit more to that. What you're saying now just sounds like a general argument. Even if he doesn't believe in hell, he has an incentive to make people believe in hell for them to join Christianity, which is different. But I think the fact that hell was important to convince people to opt into Christianity in the first place is something that can be used to explain why the Pope himself is likely to also believe hell exists. Anyone has an idea why? How we can use this?
Maybe because hell is used in religion as a form of punishment, because there are some rules, some norms, and if you don't follow them, then you will get a punishment. Hell.
And why does it mean that the Pope likely believes that?
Maybe you could say that from his childhood, he always, like as children normally do, he was very impressed by the idea of hell, because it is eternal and this is damnation and terrible punishment and so on. So maybe since he was very young, he prayed and tried to be a good person to avoid it. So this is something very deep that he holds very deep in his heart.
Exactly. So what we can say here is, because from a very young age, he himself not only believed in hell, you believe in many things in the Bible that you change. And this is the easy thing for government to say, right? We change many things in modern interpretation. We already allowed, like Pope Francis has already declared that it is legitimate to use contraceptions in developing countries, for example, which is something the Bible would forbid, right? But who cares? So some things in religion can change. We want to characterize what can't change. And I think this is a good way to do this. This is not just something you believed in from a very young age. This is something that you made great deal of sacrifices for. The fear of hell that was embedded in you personally as a child from a very young age has made you avoid sin, make great sacrifices, not have premarital sex, not masturbate, not eat in certain ways, etc., because you believed truly that it will lead to hell if you weren't to do this. Even if you were to find a concise proof that hell doesn't exist, you would be unlikely to believe it, because you already have so much sunk cost in the belief that hell exists that you would feel like a fool if you've sacrificed so much for this just to end up realizing that it is nonsense. Also, we can use it in the flip side of this. You've also made other people suffer for this. You have made people be punished for their actions and made them make sacrifices, and the justification you had to give to yourself as to why you do that is because you felt like you were saving them. You were saving them from eternal damnation. If you were to accept that hell doesn't exist, you would have to accept that you have mistreated so many people in vain. And this is why you're overwhelmingly likely to believe genuinely and not just as a hoax. And I think this is the harder approach. Like many oppositions in this debate try to say, oh, the Pope might believe hell exists, but should just, because it's worthwhile for Christianity to say that it does, the Pope, even if it doesn't exist in hell, he should advocate for this. And it's a very hard stance to defend. It's very easy then for teams to say, wait, but like, if he believes or doesn't believe something exists, the Pope has to follow his real beliefs, because if he really believes hell doesn't exist, he wouldn't lie just because he thinks it's worthwhile. The kind of people who choose or end up being popes and get selected for this are the kind of people who care a great deal about humanity and their followers and want to lead them to the right path. It will feel like a sin to lie to them. So proving that they are likely to genuinely believe this without a shred of doubt is something that I think is valuable in debates about religion. This characterization, by the way, can also be used not just for the Pope himself, but for the followers. Like when you try to characterize whether or not it's likely that you will be convincing, that people will believe you, it might be easy for God to say, well, people always listen to the Pope, right? Catholics are so used to taking the Pope's word as gospel. So being able to characterize why they are so sold into the idea of hell that they are unlikely to buy this is also an important characterization. Are there questions on this example?
Yeah, I have questions for the opposite side that will try to protect position of destroying that concept. I just have an argument. I want to know how it's relevant. We have time for that.
You mean how to characterize the opposing side? Why he is likely to believe that hell doesn't exist? Is that the question?
Yeah.
So I think there are many ways to do this. The first one is just to talk about Pope Francis specifically and connect it to things that he has already said, like his apologeticism towards LGBT people, his apologeticism towards use of contraceptions, divorced women, etc. He was relatively progressive. The reason that it is important is because many of the things that he already apologized for are things that are deserving of hell according to the Bible. Gay people are supposed to go to hell according to the Bible. So if he were truly to believe that hell exists, he wouldn't have condemned all of these people to hell. He would feel like a sinner to tell them that what they are doing is fine, knowing that he condemns them for eternal damnation. So he probably had to believe that hell is a metaphor, something that is not completely as people grasp it literally in the Bible, right? Secondly, I think a lot of the things that I said on the other side could be mitigated by the concept of heaven. We could say that the reason we did all of these things were to reach heaven, not to avoid hell. And it's not a complete rebuttal, but it mitigates a lot of the things we said on opposition. And then just general characterizations of why he is likely to believe that hell is something so vicious and so contradicting to the idea of God, especially in Christianity. Like, think of things that you can use within the Bible. The fact that the most maybe common saying in Christianity is "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The concept of forgiveness being so inherent to the idea of the Christian God makes it so hard to believe that he would sentence people to an eternity where they can never redeem themselves. He's so much about giving second chances that the Pope can't believe really that he would condemn people for eternity. So this is another way to do that. Was that clear?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's do another one. Okay, here's a fun one. I think this is a motion that Miloš set. At least it was in Lund IV 2018. This house would let school students choose to take esports lessons rather than physical education lessons. For the purposes of this practice, we're going to be proposition, and we want to argue that esports are much better to students' self-esteem than physical education. And to do this, we want to characterize both sides, right? How esports looks like and how physical education lessons look like, to show why esports is likely to be much better for students to develop self-esteem. So take a couple of minutes to think of how you would characterize those.
Yeah, can I ask, esports, it means cyber sports?
Esports is basically gaming. So esports is a name that is given for competitive gaming, for computer games which are done competitively and against other players.
Okay.
Okay, anyone ready to offer their characterization? Let's take another minute then.
So, if I get it right, we have the esports and the physical sports, and we should find the characterization about what is the why people are feeling gooder or more good in each of those. Yeah.
Yeah, specifically for this practice, we are government, and we want to show why esports is better for kids feeling good about themselves, for their self-esteem, than physical sports.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
So I want to try. So okay, first of all, we need to characterize that two types of sports. Yeah. So and now we in types of sports we know that we need a lot of like work for taking some uh, some advantage from that, and we know that we have a big like a lot of money, so that's the reason why in physical sports now we have uh, how is it like racing between sportsmen, and we have um, some points of clash when some younger sportsmen coming to that sport, so they having some pressing from the oldest sportsmen, because old sportsmen don't wanna that younger sportsmen will take their places. Yeah. So what about esports? In comparing with that, we know that esports is more easily uh, to in that, because all of us have computers, for example, all of us uh, have internet, and so it's more easy to realize us like taking some advantages from the esports. And now we know that we have a lot of donors to esports. We have a lot of supporters of that sport types. So we know that even in esports we can take money, and we know that for younger men who going after school, yeah, who left the school only now, they don't need a lot of money. That's its main reason why people going to big sport. Yeah. So we think that is first of all its argument. Yeah. So I mean that's it, because that's easier for them, and they are less harming in that type. It's more better for them, like motivated them to going in that. And even if someone wanna go to for physics sports, they even now they can do that, because we have a lot of academy that's special, like special directed uh, for young sportsmen. Yeah, they searching for them. So after school, we can go to esports without any problem.
Okay, so
If I can.
yeah, just a sec.
Yeah.
Just
I
to
have a. Oh.
yeah, just to respond to that. So just want to make clear that this motion is specifically about schools. So we talk about like high schools, middle schools, etc. So I think it's a bit harder to connect it to characterization relevant to the market once you reach the competitive levels, because we're probably not there yet. I think, however, there were two parts which were good in what you just described that we can use. One is about the accessibility of everyone having a computer in their home, and I think specifically what is lacking here is the other side of that. That is, in order to be good at sports, at physical sports, you need to have the body. Not everyone has that. Sometimes you are overweight, sometimes you are too short, you are too whatever, whereas everyone can succeed in esports if they want. The second thing, which I think was a good direction in what you mentioned, was about the competitiveness within the team or the group. But Maybe Sergey has something to say on that, so I'll leave that for later to see.
Yeah, I had another ideas about the characterizations, but if you have something to add here before I go.
Sure. So just to close down the idea of using the team dynamics in order to explain how they play into student self-esteem in esports versus physical sports, I think something that can be said, or what I said when I was giving this motion, was in a team, there is going to be in physical education the weaker link, this kid who gets selected last for the team in basketball lessons, the kid who missed or dodged the ball and everyone blames them for it later. In esports, the dynamic is very different for a myriad of reasons. Like you're usually not a liability, right? Everyone is an extra something, extra set of skills, extra slots to carry or whatever, depending on which esports you're playing. And you can't dodge the ball for everyone else. It's not how it works. At worst, you're not going to be an added value, but you can't be a liability. And you don't get people selected first or selected last, right? You have a list of people joining teams automatically. So there are many ways in which the dynamic is just much more friendly and less likely to have people bully you for that. But yeah,
what is the motion? I'm now very curious. What are
this
you talking?
house would let students choose esports rather than physical education lessons.
Oh, that's my baby. Nice.
Yeah, I assumed.
Yeah, I said this. I said this first. So what? And what was the question?
So we are a prop, and we are trying to characterize why esports are better for students' self-esteem than physical education. So the first thing we said is the physical traits require something that not everyone has. You sometimes can be overweight, too short, whatever, whereas in esports, everyone has an equal shot to succeed. Second thing we said is team dynamics, and I think Sergey wants to add more.
This is more about this kind that all the people are different, yeah. So they can be I don't know, some skinny people or some taller or shorter or something like this, yeah. But in esports, you have choose your own character. You can choose their strengths, their weaknesses, or you can make I don't know, or at least you have a standard character, and it's all about your skills, yeah. It's not about things that you can choose and that you can develop in yourself, yeah.
I think
it's also worthwhile probably to just characterize which games are going to be played, right? In that sense, so that's what I had in mind, like Counter-Strike, I don't know, League of Legends. What is the likelihood that you're going to be playing in these esports classes? What are the largest esports? And then you can draw some of the things from that as well. Like
Yeah,
there is actually a very good feminist extension in that motion as well, which means that it's unlikely that a girl competes with a man in football, but they can pretty much shoot guys. Like, I mean, maybe men will be better at the beginning, but like no, there is nothing biological that is making you incapable to shoot somebody in the head in the game. So
I think a way to extend on the characterization that Sergey suggested before I let Artem speak as well is also connecting to the fact that in esports, I think the idea of choice that you mentioned is interesting, because what I think I said back at the time was also there's more variety. In physical education, you need to be able to score hoops or to catch the ball or to run fast. You have very limited actual set of skills. In esports, there's such a large variety, both of games and within games, different kind of things you can do, that it is extremely likely that everyone can find something that they are good at. Artem, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had a counter argument because to me, everything that was said, or almost everything beyond Milish's feminist extension, is very symmetric on both sides. Because like while there are people who are good at physical sports and have innate abilities that make them so, there are people who are good at esports and have character traits or physical abilities that make them so. And while like in esports you have different roles, in physical sports you also have like goalkeeper or defender, or I don't know, attacker, how they are called. So I think it is very symmetric on both sides in terms of
but
most things.
Oh, sure, but what I would claim here is it's different in terms of. Uh, I would just mostly focus on the physicality of it, right? Most of the things that is different still requires some level of physical capability and not being clumsy and not being something like this and not being made fun of like this. So I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely fair point. It's definitely a fair point that some of these things about being different is symmetrical. Just the fact that it's in mind makes it a bit less symmetrical because like physical ability, if you're prevented by this, is you're completely fucked if you're a child who's clumsy and horrible. I don't know. At least in my school, it was like that.
Yeah,
Which
I think also another thing you can add to make it more so is when you have a physical education teacher in a class of 30 students and they can't afford to make a match your skills kind of activity because you're not your private tutor, so they're going to give everyone the same thing. Today we all jump and measure how high you jump.
yeah,
Today we all run. You're not able to actually give every student what they are good at. In esports, it's much easier. You just need enough computers, and schools have enough computers. Um, Another
yeah,
characterization, which I think can be fun, which probably Milos would do better than me because I only ever played one esports. It was a dark time in high school when I played Hearthstone. But
mhm,
I think a characterization that can be used here is what I flagged earlier when we discussed the guiding questions about the market. Why the market has an incentive to make you feel good when you play esports. Think of this. What happens in computer games in general when you play them? Whenever you
mhm.
level up, you hear music and see like flashing things on the screen telling you good job and giving you XP. Like you have very good affirmations that you did well and from the game, tracking your goals and achievements and giving you quests that you fulfill because they want to get you addicted, right? That's how they do it. So it is very easy to get affirmations that you are great as opposed to sports when everyone laughs at you.
It's partially true, I'd say. If you ever been to like an internet cafe with friends where people call you noob, and everybody's horribly toxic, like people get into a fight about this. In Serbia, there was very often times that two guys, like one guy kills him like with a knife in CS:GO or something like this, and then they go out and fight or something like this. So there is a toxicity component there as well, for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. I think the point here is it could be done on both sides
Yeah,
of the debate because debates
yeah.
need to have both two sides. But yeah, the point is characterizing how esports look like and how sports look like is something that helps. And I think something less to say about this. Note how in every of these arguments we did both sides of the comparison. So this is linking back to what we said earlier about being comparative in characterization. This is one of these debates which really begs for it. Um,
Hmm.
okay, uh, let's do another practice example. Okay, this one has a catch. I won't tell you what it is. I want to see if you're going to find it. The motion is this house would subsidize housing for the poor in the city center. We are proposition. We want to argue that the motion will lead to better integration. It will break stereotypes about the poor and make them more accepted by the elites. Try to think how you would characterize the interactions to prove this case. Okay, is there any volunteer that wants to give their idea for characterization, or do you need more time? Let's take another minute then. Okay, anyone wants to start?
Yeah, okay. So, first, I think we need to make some barriers between which part of poor people and which part of which types of rich people we are talking about. We think we're not talking about some drug addicted poor people or someone guilty, because we think that it's someone, yeah, okay. So, and we are not talking about some multi-millionaires rich people. We're just talking about people who live in rich parts of city, for example in center of city, where we have a lot of business centers, a lot of job places, workplaces, some some places where it's where flats or house it's costly and expensive. So uh, and we think that problem with integrations happening via because now in status quo we know that rich people and poor people is connected. It like they having some points where they meeting together, but it's uh, most time at work, for example, at service some centers, maybe in cafes, in restaurants, or maybe in school, not in schools, but for example taxi driver can be poor person, something like that. But now what will be changed, yeah. uh, Today they will be in ordinary situations when, for example, their child will go in one school, they will go in one, for example, hospital. And for example in parents meetings, yeah, where the class teacher will collect of all parents, they will meet not in work situation. So or maybe they will walking in the park and meeting, yeah, and maybe they will be connected with together. So we think that it's in status future, if we will do that, they will have a lot of another uh, times where they can meet with us, uh, between them, and where they can make a normal conversation about daily life but not about work. So it will be more helpful to in that integration. And secondly, we think if about integration, we are talking about their life conditions, how they will survive in uh, rich part of cities. We think that even in that parts we have a work for that poor people. For example, they could just work at shop or in service in service part of labor market, so that it's not problem for them integrate in that life from the financial things, and they also can integrate in like social things by meetings with a rich person, making connection with them. So I think that's enough.
Yeah, okay. That was actually very good. I want to flag two things which I think were good about this characterization before I let others add, of course, because I think there are more things to say. One thing which I think was done very well, and I want to flag, is the ability to do it comparatively here. So using not only what are the interactions after the motion, but also reminding us that interactions exist on both sides. This is important because obviously when opposition is going to argue, negative interactions, they're going to be their shoe shiners and service providers. Here, the good thing done in this characterization is, but this happens today already. Like they are already your taxi drivers and your McDonald's cooks or whatever. So the delta, the sorry for the word, yeah, the thing that actually changes in the debate is the alternative sort of interactions, the ones which are more equal interactions without power dynamics, which I think is a very good strategical identification. I think the second thing that was done here well is using concrete situations to describe. So I was almost afraid when you said ordinary situations, because this would be a generality, but then came the explanation. The school kids going to the same school and getting to know each other, meeting at the hospital, meeting at the street and having day-to-day discussions about the weather and everything that is normal rather than just job. Okay, so that was a good example. I think there are still things to add. So anyone wants to jump in and add more ideas of how to characterize this?
So maybe that those are likely to be motivated poor people who move there, like there is some process and like you need to fill in the form and so on. Maybe poor people with children who want like a better life for them.
Okay, so there's a characterization of the stakeholders here. Who are likely to be these poor people? Why they are likely to be the ones who are motivated to try and integrate, and therefore they will do their best to be a good example. Any more ideas?
Maybe we can add that those people will be, I don't know, somehow randomly put in those areas. So you have some people, I don't know, rich and some people poor, and they can interact more in the case, or I don't know, on the parties when they go with all those area, or not area, or those street. I don't know how to say. Maybe in the case where see how they interact daily. Yeah, rich people see how the poor people are interacting daily, and they understand that there are also people there are have some some patterns of those people, some idea of how those people thinking. Maybe if you should solve some problems and you should interact with your voisin, with the people near you who lives near you,
Neighbors.
and neighbors. Yeah, neighbors. I don't know, like your street is broken, or I don't know, things like this. Yeah. If you, I don't know, if you don't have something and like a trimmer or something like this, and you might find a voisin, or you might find a neighbor who have it. Yeah, some stuff like a hammer, or I don't know, like this. Yeah, and you go and ask to the people, and yeah, also if you, I don't know, if you're rich, yeah, you may try to find someone to do the things which you need, like Patricia Zone.
Okay, I think what was good about this, I think there was one thing that was very good about this example and one thing that could improve. So I think the thing that was very good about this is going into the small details, like you needing help, so you ask your neighbor for a hammer or for a helping hand in building, in construction, whatever. I think what can be improved here, despite me liking the level of detail, is also choosing examples which are more likely to be intuitively connected to people's perceptions of each other's moral values or values as humans. So I think the example of me borrowing a hammer for my neighbor in need is something that is a bit hard to connect to, and then I learned that they are a good human with a personality. I think there are things that are more intuitive. So, for example, neighbors with kids, for example, often want to have like play dates and help each other babysit and stuff like that. And these are occasions in which actually when the kids play, they talk to each other and help each other in valuable things. Or often they will go together to like meetings of the boardroom of the building and discuss together how to improve the neighborhood, the cleanliness. They will actually have meaningful conversations, or just so many situations in which they will be captive audience to talking together. Even when they stand in line in the market and they are 5 minutes stuck next to each other with nothing else to do, they are likely to do the day-to-day chit chat of like, how was your day? Are you having difficulties at home? How's the wife? How are the kids? And all of that jazz. But yeah, I think the level of concretization here was very good. One more thing that I want to flag about all of the answers, which I think is important to notice, because I think you found out the catch that I was aiming for, which is a good sign. A good thing that was done here, and I see often, very often neglected in these kinds of motions and in these kinds of arguments, is identifying that it's not enough to prove or to characterize interactions existing, but you need to characterize them to be ones of good nature. So the most common thing that I've seen governments in these kinds of motions do is just characterize, oh, they will have interactions, they will meet, they will be at the same building, they will go to the same job place and stuff like that, which makes it very easy for opposition to say, yeah, but they will be having bad interactions. They will reinforce their stereotypes. So the good thing that was done here, and is important to notice to repeat doing, is focusing on why these interactions are likely to be positive ones. There are ones that are tied to health, because you have helping relations between neighbors. There are ones that are tied to like more innocent times, like kids in school, which are not having prejudices yet, and stuff like that. Okay.
There was Alma raise a hand.
Oh yeah, you want to talk?
Yeah, I wanna make a little bit change in characterizations that I gave before, and I'm thinking it will be better. So, uh, uh, when Sergio is talking, I'm thinking about such point. Now, even in the service market, we have poor people that making connection with the rich people, yeah, about whose work and something like that. But also we know that in status quo we have, for example, rich part of city and poor part of city, yeah. So people from the poor parts not often going for work in another part. Why it's happening so? Because their, for example, workplaces, their home is more close uh, to that part of city, so it's uncomfortable for them to going to the rich part. Yeah, so they mostly not working in restaurants and cafes that stated in rich part of city, and they it's not a taxi drivers in the center of city. Yeah, so but what will be changed when they will like transfer from one part to another, so they will have a chance work in that places. So I mean that if they will take opportunity to work in that parties for the rich people. For example, they can work like as a nurse, yeah, nurse, as a like a medic or something like that, and so or I don't know, maybe they can work as a teacher or in service place. It doesn't matter. I mean that they will have an opportunity working in service market here in that part. So that's a good, because a lot of parts of our life, yeah, for example, 8 hours of day we are spent it at work. So and that means that we have more chances to making connections when we at work with our colleagues, with our boss or something like that. But we are not going for like talking with strange person in the street, or we are not going to our neighbors, yeah, for asking hammer or something like that. Yeah.
Definitely, I think even more than that. I think in this motion, it's also very worthwhile characterizing the counterfactual interactions, not only as the taxi driver. I think there are things that are worse to use, which are not so worse that they sound extreme and unbelievable, such as a lot of our exposure to poor people and their life after the workplace, because we usually don't drive to their neighborhoods, is what we see on TV, what we see in like TV shows and series or documentaries, which are overwhelmingly focusing on the bad aspects about the crime, about the drug abuse, etc., which obviously reinforces stereotypes. But anyway, I want to do another example, which I think is also useful to test our ability to use characterization in framing. This is the last example I want to do, so just checking before. Milos, is there another example you want to test for?
No, I get, like, as I said, I need to have focus on my work. I'm sorry. So
No worries.
I think these were very good, and honestly, I think you guys are getting the grasp of this. So it seems like you're already on the right track, I think.
Awesome. So let's do one last example. I'll say in advance, it will be more difficult than others we did. It is a difficult motion, but I think it's a good practice. So the motion is, this house opposes depictions of female reciprocal violence in media. Female reciprocal violence, meaning women using violence as a means of revenge towards men that have hurt them. A classic example being Kill Bill, the movie. So this house opposes depictions of female reciprocal violence in pop culture media. And for this purpose, your CO and top half already ran the following arguments. OG ran that it makes women feel bad about themselves or self-blame when they are experiencing violence or harm by men, because they feel like they are expected to react violently rather than, like many women do, freeze and not react to this. OO runs that it sends the message that women can be strong, that it gives them a role model to see women being standing on their own and not just caving and being a victim. You're CO, and you want to run the extension that actually female reciprocal violence sends women the message that they can afford to react because they see society reacts well to this. They see that this is something that is good to do, that they are not ruining a man's life if they do that. Now, what I want you to think about in this practice, which is hard, is not only how you would characterize this narrative to likely lead to this result, but also think how you would weigh this, how you would weaponize your characterization to show why this is a better argument than the top half clash. Try to think of this for a few minutes. Just checking, though, that everyone understands the practice or the question. It's okay, so ask questions if you don't understand.
Could you please repeat very briefly our own argument? Very briefly.
Yeah. So our argument from CO is we think depictions of female reciprocal violence is good because it shows women that it is legitimate if they do stand for their own. That is, that they can afford to complain or to speak up for themselves and to come forward and don't have to accept it when men mistreat them.
And which is the motion?
This house opposes depictions of female reciprocal violence.
I have another call that I need to join now. Sorry again, but I guess this is the last thing. This is the last thing that we will do. So just wanted to say bye before I go. I'm sorry that I was a bit less active. It's just that I got a huge data dump at like very late this evening. So horrible. But yeah, good luck and enjoy your weekend. Bye.
Bye, Milos. Thanks for finding some time for us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, awesome.
Checking. Does anyone have already an idea of how to characterize something like this?
So if I understood the characterization part of it correctly, so basically there are many situations when there is conflict or conflict of interest, and the way people behave there is the way they feel the society wants them to behave. So they need images and narratives and ideas of normally men are told that oh, you need to fight for your rights, or you need to protect yourself or your family, or you need to go and grab something, and so on. While women are often given other narratives, you need to not be as confrontational and so on. So when they see a narrative when a woman stands up to her rights, they feel that she had the right to do that because she was wronged, and also they now have a narrative that tells them that it is all right and they can do that. So, which is very important because it specifically helps them in the situations of conflict of interest when they want something that another person also wants.
Okay, so the key question here is, why do they get this narrative? I'm flagging back to what Milos said earlier when we discussed narrative debates in general. Not everyone is convinced by every narrative they hear. Like, why do they buy it? Why do they think this is really reflective of real life?
Because they get fed this a lot. This is the only thing that they hear, and different types of from different sides, there are different narratives that push very similar things. Like, you need to be in a supportive role. This is one thing. Girls don't fight. This is another thing. Girls don't swear. This is third thing. So they get a lot of narratives that push them into that direction.
Okay, that's good. That explains one side of the counterfactual. That explains why, absent this narrative, girls are likely to believe that they shouldn't fight back. Why, with the narrative, they are likely to believe that they should? Why do they get the message that it is fine just because they've seen it on TV?
Because TV is powerful, and it presents you very, very cool narratives that are very interesting, and those are heroes that you grow up with when you're watching those movies. Something, I don't know.
Okay, so that's one way to do this, which I think is good, right? Talking about characterizing how this looks like in the film. They are not portrayed as the villain. They are portrayed by Hollywood with all of their budget for doing this and their incentives to make you identify with the lead character like it's a good thing, right? They give them the music that and the lighting that makes them seem good and better. They give them the character so everyone can identify with them. So it is seen like a good woman as opposed to someone who is just overreacting. What else? Any more ideas?
Yeah, first of all, I want to try to prove by another way why they will use that narratives. So, uh, I think that situation about what we need to talk is situation of women who has no another alternatives. For example, she's feeling harming by men, for example, she's in abuse relationships or something like that, or she under pressing of relationships, yeah. So now if she one time saw that film, yeah, it doesn't matter one, just she saw that film. So, and also she have a lot of she has a lot of narratives about she's need to be a supporter, like something like that. So and go on. So, and in future uh, when uh, when that abuse will be such strongly, she will remind that she have another alternative, that she can fight, for example, that she can do something another that following for narratives of supporters and something like that, but she also can fight with that. So that will be useful for she. So it's a reason why we can support such films. Yeah. So I mean that 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 narratives will be she will use that narratives in time where she will have another alternatives. So showing to she that films is good. So and else, what about characterization? Yeah. I think that such films will influence only at women's major at women's. So why it's uh, in which situation, yeah, in status quo that women's. So uh, I think that we are talking about the women that under pressing, so that harming nowadays we are mostly not like talking about like some women that have a comfortable life. So and I think that in characterization of that woman we have that they're always in position of defending, uh, where they taking harm and trying to protect themselves but never don't try to attack. Yeah, even if society helped she's feeling that she's just defending because, for example, lower or some government structures that just help for she, but not fighting for she. So such films, uh, it's something new for she because it's changing her position from defenders to the fighter. So and that's think it's more uh, like no, it's more better, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that.
So I think this is good characterization on the way to the clash, but not yet on the clash. Because note, thinking back to what I've said was probably run on top half already. OG, in this example, and in real life, last time I remember this debate was run, said the message they will get from this is that whenever they are assaulted or oppressed in their day to day, they are to blame for this because they didn't retaliate. Why is this important? Because note what is likely to be in concession in the debate. It is likely to be agreed that the characterization of women who are susceptible to messages from these sort of films and media is mostly women who have experienced some form of oppression or violence. We don't need to characterize why it's likely that they do have such experiences. We do need to characterize why it's likely that the message they will take from this is that they can and will be respected for standing up to themselves, not that they should feel blamed for not standing up to themselves. Why is the likely interpretation of the message going to be the one that we want them to get? Try to think of this direction. Any more ideas?
I can add something. So I think that in real life, those women they tend to try to make other person, for example, her father or her boyfriend, someone who oppresses her in a way. They try and I forgot the word. They try to stand in their place to understand them, and they don't really make it about themselves, so they choose other person's good over theirs. But then they see this movie where it's shown from a position of women. So for example, in her day-to-day life, she often tries to analyze things from how good would it be to the man in my life, but then she sees it like she absorbs it from the second person, but she also understands that yes, this man, for example, is really bad, and this woman she fights for her good, and it's I think that the message that she would likely take is not that this woman is strong, but that this woman is kind of the same as me, and she could fight for her own. She did it, and because the other person was really bad, and I can do the same thing. And I think they won't feel they won't blame themselves for not standing up, because in the film, in the movie, uh, uh, because in the movie, the woman stand for her right to. She chose her own life for her own good over someone else's. I'm not sure if I delivered my
I think so. I think it is the capacity. I think it is a very good start, which I would want to hear you or anyone else close, like finish it. So just to flag, I think what was good there is relating what was seen on screen to the real life experiences. That is, I will think she is like me. It will relate to experiences I already know. When I see her experiencing oppression, I will see the similarities between this and my own. And then I'm still missing the connection to the bottom line of, and this will make me feel like I should act like her, not that I were bad not to act like her. Like, where is the? I still need the connection as to why it will lead me to think that the way she reacted in this movie is something that I should learn from. Because obviously, let's make it harder. Let's see what is the charitable characterization we can give Gov probably saying here, right? Most of these action movies are extremely like unrealistic and have very strong reactions, including literal use of guns and very physically powerful women, and not something that most women are even able to do if they were to want to. So why is it still likely to give me the good kind of message out of it?
Maybe saying that nobody takes those films like at 100%, and people like get some inspiration maybe from them, or they like get some ideas or direction, but they like nobody expects men or women to like be a Rambo and kill all their enemies with bare hands and so on.
Exactly. And I think just to close, like to finish what Artem said, because I think this is exactly where I wanted to bring us, because it is a hard example for a reason. The reason why it is a very difficult motion is because it is extremely fluff. Like the impact is like this, right? I don't buy any of the top half arguments. I really don't buy women will feel bad about not shooting their assaulter, and I really don't buy women will feel like seeing someone strong because they know it is a movie and the director made them seem strong and they know nothing of this is real, will be something that makes them feel themselves to be stronger. All of this sounds like very, very, very small. What isn't, though, and what I think could be used to strengthen here, and what I would use from CO to weigh this kind of extension, is a nice trick which I found useful in many debates about art and narratives, and that is to, I sometimes call it, step out of the screen. It is very tempting for us when we talk about a certain narrative to stay only within the realms of the narrative. So when we think about a movie, we only characterize what happens on the screen, in the movie. We sometimes neglect to characterize the setting and the environment in which this movie is watched. And I think something helpful to use in this example is, I see someone in a similar situation to my own that very reminds me of the last time I felt like I would be overreacting if I would speak up. And she reacts not only as I would want to, but much more, right? The exact extreme characterization of shooting guns and jumping off hoops, etc. And what I see next is the audience cheering for her, the criticisms in the newspaper applauding how great of a character she is, her becoming a character that young girls dress up as in parties, and that have action figures that people use and give their kids. No one is shaming her. This is extremely important in a society in which we are used to seeing victims of assault or oppression speak up and be told that they are overreacting, that they are ruining a man's life, etc., etc. And what is the weighing here that I could use is, when something happens on screen, it is very unlikely to be compelling. People know that they shouldn't believe what they see on TV. People know it's a bluff. People know it's effects and editing and budget. But what they see outside of the screen, what they see in the discourse afterwards, in the reactions of the audience, in the way that the people who consume this media continue talking about this media, that is real. That is something they are more likely to believe, to actually reflect what they will experience if they were to act in a certain manner. And here I would use what Artyom said. we don't take it for face value. We don't think that we are supposed to shoot anyone who harmed us. But we now see that it is very possible for people to support us, for the environment to see us as the heroines of the story, if we do act up, to not blame us for it. And this is something that is more compelling than both top half arguments, because it goes out of the screen into the realm that is more unbelievable to people. Is that understood? Yeah?
Yep, that's understandable. But I wanna add some thoughts. So, if we will trying to prove that, characterize that, but characterize things that films, for example, as you said, in that film, for example, that woman under the press and having some troubles, and at middle of the film, she's meeting, for example, another woman who is strong, who can help, who can uh, find a solution for that problem, or even that woman, yeah, who was under pressure, find some solution. So that woman who will saw that film, they will see that characters in that film having some problem, but when they fighting with that problem, I mean not shooting, but I mean just like trying to finding solution by making some aggressive maybe methods, or trying to making some radical solution. I can find words. I mean, like some strongly things. Yeah. So when they saw that when woman do that, she can find a solution for her problems. They will believe in that. Why it will be so? Because we know, even if that film is unrealistic, even now we know that producers or filmmakers wanna try keeping some realistic things, some relationships, some like describing society for making that film it's more more better for taking by community that film. So I think that women's like that's why women who saw that film even now can take that patterns from that film. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We never want to argue that people will act exactly like they see on screen. I think the important thing that I wanted to emphasize here is the way to do this is often thinking a bit out of the clash or out of the screen. It is important to stay open-minded in debates about narratives and art when we characterize stuff, to not only characterize the obvious part of the motion, not only characterize the exact medium within things happen, but also the surrounding setting of it. I can give another example, but before that, I think Sergey also wanted to say something. Okay.
No.
Okay, I'll give a quick example. This one, I just for the sake of time, I will explain rather than practicing it together to maybe help this idea sink. So once I was CG for the motion, this house supports the rise of, this house regrets the rise of nihilism in popular culture, in shows such as Rick and Morty and BoJack Horseman. Nihilism being like the feeling that the narrative that nothing has meaning and stuff. And Top Half talked a lot about the following stuff. So OG said it will make people immoral because they will see nihilism is fine. OO said, no, it will make people feel like there are others like them and won't feel so alone if they have depression and feel that nothing matters. So it will give people with depression a way out. And I came up as a member of government and I said what is, by the way, a common framing which I use in like half of narrative debates nowadays. I didn't make it up. I've heard it from someone in BGU a few years ago. So many years, little kids watch Superman on the big screen, and I have yet to see anyone going out with panties over their tights and jumping off roofs trying to fly. People don't believe everything they see on TV. People don't believe because nihilism is on screen, it means that they should act like nihilists. They also don't believe that it means that there are others like them because, oh yay, a talking horseman is like me, so I'm not alone. Obviously, it will make me feel there are others like me in the world. So probably not that. And then I did something similar to what happened in the example we did before. I stepped out of the film, out of the TV shows. Rather than talk about what happens in the shows, I talked about what happened in the fan base, in the people discussing the shows. So what happens when depressed teenagers start using these shows as their way to vent their depression? When people ask them, how are you feeling? And they can answer, I want to kill myself, yabba labba dab dab, like something Rick would say. It is a way for them to disguise their depression and their struggles with humor. It is a way that they use to avoid actually talking about their problems, but ridiculing them, presenting them as cynicism, as something not really a big deal, right? It's just a joke. All of these nihilistic memes that teens put up and make people not realize that they really have a problem, that they really want to talk about something. Because now we gave them a way to talk about it without making it seem serious. And that's a problem, because then teens don't talk about their problems, or people don't identify it on time because it seems like a joke. Not just that, even if they do talk about it seriously, others will think it is a joke because they're so used to consuming media that jokes about these kinds of matters. The important thing about what I did here, it's not necessarily the only or the best case in the debate, but it is extremely easy to weigh in this framework because it's not based on me believing stuff I see on TV. Quite the contrary. It is based on me not believing it, and me thinking things are a joke and then assigning this same value to real life events. So the thing I wanted to demonstrate through these two examples is that sometimes in characterization, we want to think a bit out of the box, to characterize things not only directly within the narrative, but also in its surrounding, in its like the audience and the reactions to it. Is that concept clear?
Yeah, clear.
Okay. That's mostly everything I've had to say. Does anyone have any questions about anything we learned today? Okay. In which case, good night, everyone, and see you again in 2 weeks, I suppose.